he said, if the truth will set you free, then there's another truth to that side. Then lies build prisons. And I was living in a prison because of the lies. And I was in that prison, caged and just suffering and struggling. And as I began to go deeper into the lies, I just became more enslaved. All I remember is waking up in the psychiatric ward, in that hospital, and restrained in the bed.
H1 united, come on, don't fight it. You heard it here first, now run and tell of the righteous riot.
Grace and peace, y'all.
There you go. There you go.
Welcome to Run and Tell. You're watching a podcast where we try to highlight the goodness of God in the lives of everyday people. And I'm excited about today's interview. This is something that I wanted to do in some kind of way, whether it be through a documentary or just a podcast, interviewing my brother here, Kermit Boyd. He has a special testimony that I want to get into the details of because I've only heard the gist of it throughout the years. And so this is something we've been talking about doing for quite a while. And just to introduce you to Kermit is someone I've known for probably almost 8 years now. You know, I'm so happy that we're able to get together right now and be able to really get into your testimony, bro. I'm actually genuinely looking forward to it because, like I said, throughout the years, you know, I've only got the gist of it, bro.
Right.
So, Kermit, why don't you tell us your upbringing, set the stage for the climax of that turning point in your life.
I've always have been in the church, a part of the body of Christ, right? My from day one, I can remember being and growing up in church. So my dad, he's actually a pastor, and we grew up Church of God in Christ. And so I've always known something about God. And so I'll start there for myself, just because I think that's the important part. At the age of 7 years old, I remember my dad making dinner in the kitchen and me asking him, "Hey, Dad, how do you be saved? How do you get saved?" And he told me, and I said, "I want to get saved." So I remember him praying with me at that age in Pomona, where we lived, P-Town, and him leading me through, quote unquote, the sinner's prayer. And from that stage on, from that point on, I thought and believed that I was saved because I did that. I didn't start speaking in tongues or anything at the age of 7 or anything like that, but I just believed from that moment that I was saved. Now, if you ask me about my life, which we're going to get into, I felt that was a lot different. So, growing up in the church, I always felt that, you know, I had to be a certain way. You know, when we went to church, we would dress up in a suit and tie. My dad had a suit and booted. I kid you not, every Sunday school we were in, me and my brother and my sisters, we looked nice. As you call it, we looked sharp. And so growing up in that, aesthetically looking the part, I always, for me, I took that as, well, if I look this good, then I got to make sure I act this good. And so I kind of grew up with the mindset of, I look the part, so I need to act the part. So the saying, fake it till you make it, is something that I adopted. But I changed that now. I tell my students, don't fake it till you make it so you never have to fake it.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah. But so I grew up like that, and not because my parents raised me like that, but because that's the construct that I created in my mind, and that did affect me negatively from the time that I grew up in Pomona. Up until now, or up until I believe my salvation point came, that's the way I had lived. And so living in that weird kind of dichotomy definitely taxed me mentally and emotionally. And so growing up like that, and being one way in church and then being with your friends and your boys, for me in Pomona, you wanted to be a certain way. And so I learned to be one way in church on Sunday, and one day during the week, or a couple days for us during the week, and another way at school around friends. And so growing up, you get exposed to a lot of things. And so one of the things that definitely had a negative effect on me was, I remember one summer, we're, hanging out, playing around. One of our friends, he was like, hey, come to my house. Come check this out. So, all of us were like, what is it? What is it? So we go to his house and boom, there some type of, and I think I could say this on your show, but it's pornography on the TV.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, and how old was I? Like 11 years old. And I'm just like, eyes big, and I'm like, what is happening right now? What is going on? And from that point on, I was just fixed in the sense of,
How old was that again?
I want to say like 11.
Oh, okay.
11 years old. I was just like, wow, what did I just see?
I know exactly what you're talking about. If I could share my experience like that too. I think I was around 8 years old. My parents were divorced. We had just moved to Ontario from Signal Hill, Long Beach area. And this is when there were still dairy farms right there off of Archibald and the 60 freeway. So there was a lot of open space. If you're a kid, you're gonna wander all that. And so I had an older cousin, and we were living with my uncle, and we found this stack of tires. And in this stack of tires was this giant porno stash.
Oh wow!
And it was like hardcore stuff, man. And we took it back to the house, and we were trying to sneak it in, and my uncle was like, let me see that. And instead of being like, get out of here, you don't be looking at this stuff,
right?
I watched him flip through it, and we pretty much looked at it with each other,
man.
And that started a very bad trajectory in a fight with pornography. And I know at a young age, being exposed to that is traumatic.
Oh yeah,
it's traumatic,
right? And it's crazy because when you look at your childhood, at least for me, not that I'm trying to be some psychoanalytic, but when you look at your childhood, like trauma is usually, when we experience trauma like that, we carry that throughout our time into our teenage adult years. And unless we deal with that, and take that trauma and deal with it all the way to its core, it will affect us. And that's what I experienced until I dealt with it at its core. And so seeing that, like you at that early age, and seeing that, and it was like, we were passing around tapes, and I'm talking about VHS tapes. And, I remember I had my VHS tape and trying to hide it from my mom and dad. But, late at night, sneaking it in and watching it. And like I said, it just went down this vicious cycle of pornography, and then gratifying myself because of it. And so I went through that, and it led to other things, right? So mind you, I'm thinking I'm a good Christian boy now, but I'm still secretly dealing with this sin. And, you got your friends, you got your boys, you talk about it. But, when you get into church, I mean, I'm singing, I'm clapping, I'm a part of, as I looked at it, as the body, but dealing with this secret sin. And so I'm dealing with it. And there's one point as I get older, I'm kind of looked at when I get into like junior high school, I'm looked at as like kind of a leader. But all the while I'm struggling with this. And so when I get to college, I'm still struggling. And I know for many of us, when we struggle with that, it kind of leads to more sexual immorality. And so, but I was still a virgin all the way up until college, and come college, and this part of my story is a part that it still affects me. So if I cry, don't judge me.
No,
but
cry it out, bro.
But no, I've done that, but it just still affects me. So I'm dating this young lady, and I'm a senior in college, getting ready, trying to wrap up. And I'm a senior, dating this young lady, and and I lose my virginity to her. And from there, I lose my virginity to her, and it just leads to this path of just like really engulfing myself into that sexually immoral lifestyle. And so I'm dating her, and unfortunately, I get her pregnant. I don't want to say unfortunately, but I get her pregnant. The unfortunate part is that I was scared to tell anybody. I told my close friends at the time, and I was scared to tell my parents, scared to tell my mom, scared to tell my dad, my brothers, my sisters. And instead of sharing and like saying, "Hey, I got this young lady pregnant," I battled in my mind like maybe I should just get rid of the baby, abort the baby. And there was this internal wrestle with that to the like just a it was an inner turmoil that I've never had before. And as I wrestled through that, I rationalized reasons why I should do it. And those reasons why I should have an abortion with that young lady was what I did. She was against it. She did not want to do it. But I basically, I feel as I look on it now, I made her do it. And that is something you don't forget. And what killed me about that decision was I'm a person who's like said, I'm saved, I'm a Christian, I'm this, I'm that. And I know, in politics and Christianity, a lot is made of abortion. And so I grew up in a conservative home and we were against that, but I did that. And I couldn't tell anybody because of the shame. And when I did that and I made that decision, the guilt, the shame, the just the anguish that I felt was like no other. After I did that, the young lady that I was dating at the time, our relationship just began to fizzle out. And then in that time, senior in college, made that horrible decision. Really a selfish decision is where it came out of, because I was more ashamed of being found out and that I'm going to be deemed unworthy because I have a child and I'm not married and I'm supposed to wait till I get married. And I was more ashamed of all of that versus realizing this is a child that's coming into the world. And I will have to protect it, provide, and be there as a man and as a father for that child. And that went out the window. It was all about Kermit at that point. And as I went through that, and as I struggled through that, I remember just the anguish that I felt. And I remember that I used to love playing basketball at that point. I was in a lot better shape, Miles. Let me just say that first. But I was good out there. At least I thought I was. And so I'm playing basketball and I come up limping and I'm like, what happened? I think I pulled my groin. I think I'm hurt. And there's a point where the injury progresses to where I can't walk. And I'm using crutches. And so my mother at the time, she was like, I'll take you to the sports medicine doctor. We'll go there and see what's going on. And so we go to the doctor, take some x-rays. And before you know it, they have me taking some MRIs and some other tests. And I'm not sure what's going on. And I take a ultrasound. I take a bone, they do a bone biopsy. I do a CAT scan, an MRI, an ultrasound. I do all these tests and I'm like, this is just for a pulled muscle? Like, what's going on? And later, as I found out, they thought that based on my original x-ray, that in my femur, they thought I had cancer, some type of cancer. And when they told me this, I was shocked. I was like, really? Now, mind you, I'm a senior in college when all this is going on. And I'm like, cancer or what? And they was like, well, you don't have that, but you have something that's just as difficult as that, which is osteomyelitis. And it was in my right femur. And they explained to me that this is a blood disease that attacks the big bones of your body. The femur being one of the biggest bones in your body, it attacked my femur. And they said, we're going to have to treat it. And so I went to, I remember San Antonio Hospital in Upland, and I went across the street to the specialist there. And the specialist, he was, I think, some type of cancer specialist. They started to treat it with antibiotics. What they did is they ran a PICC line through my arm all the way to your heart. And that's how they gave me my antibiotics to treat it aggressively. It didn't work. And it just kept getting worse. And as I'm going through this, I'm all set to graduate from college. Well, there comes a point where I got my cap and gown, I'm ready to graduate, and I'm unable to walk across the stage. And I remember that that shame and that horrible feeling of, man, I put 4 years into what I'm doing and I'm not even able to walk across the stage to receive a piece of paper. And that made me really upset. And I was mad and I was frustrated. I was hurt. And going through that and dealing with all of that pain and just like, man, I worked hard for this. Like, and granted, it only took me 4 years to graduate after high school. So it's like, I didn't waste my time. I was focused, I was diligent, and I was trying to get this done. And dealing with that and then going through the treatments didn't work. And then from there, we went to the USC Medical Center where I dealt with some of the orthopedic specialists up there. And they said, well, you need to have surgery on your right femur. I said, what do you mean? They said, we need to take all of the dead bone that's there in your femur and clear it out. And we need to let the new bone grow on top of what's decayed so that you can be whole again. And I said, I never heard of that. They said, yeah, it's kind of like shaving. When you shave and you get a nick or a cut in your face, that it has to heal up. And that's what your bone needs to do. But we need to get rid of all the dead bone and decayed bone that's there. So I went into, so they said, we're going to do a surgery. So just finished college, didn't walk the stage, but now I'm about to have surgery on my right femur. And so they go in, I do surgery. They go in 2 places from above my knee on my side of my leg and near the top of my hip on my side. And they take out all the dead bone. Now, mind you, I couldn't walk. I couldn't put any weight, any pressure on my femur. So I had to go when I wanted to get around, I had to get pushed in a wheelchair. And that sucked because my brother was on that duty and he had to push me to different places. And John, I'm sorry, man. And so like I went from a wheelchair to a walker to crutches to basically be able to regain the strength to walk again in my right femur. And as I went through that whole process, I was mad. I was distraught. I was angry and hurting on different levels. I made a young lady get an abortion, aborted my child. I couldn't graduate and walk. And in that time, I'm masking all of this pain by still trying to date. So I get into another relationship. Another young lady kind of comes into my life that I start to date. And it's really weird, right? How all this works. So like after it doesn't work out with the young lady that I get the abortion with, and I do the treatments, they think I'm getting better and whatever. So I meet another young lady and we start dating and it gets serious. I'm having sex with her, but I'm still addicted to pornography as well. And I'm dealing with that, but I didn't graduate. I'm dating her. And then I go through the whole the surgery and I'm dating her. And it's really weird because what I've learned is that if you don't deal with the trauma, you're going to mask the trauma and you're going to cover it with other things. So what I did is I covered it with pornography, with sex, with just partying. And so that's what I did. And I was going to the club and, doing all kind of stuff. Right. And so that's what I did. I masked it and as I maxed all this pain and this trauma, I have surgery. They clear out the dead bone. I have surgery and I'm going through that. And like I said, I get pushed around in a wheelchair just to recover. And then as I'm going through all of that, it's really weird, not really weird, but I think it's interesting how God works because in that time I'm claiming that I'm a Christian, but I'm doing all these things. And then I'm questioning what's crazy, Miles, is I'm questioning God, why is this happening to me? And as I look at back and as I see that question, I'm like, what do you mean? Why were you even asking that? And I know some people, well, things don't happen to you because of sin or things do happen to you because of sin. I mean, regardless, God's going to get our attention, however he sees fit to do that. He was getting my attention through my circumstances. As I was going through that, Miles, like I'm still in church trying to serve God. I'm still trying to do different things. I'm still trying to be committed to like helping with the youth and helping my dad, because my dad's a pastor now at that time, and trying to help out. And it's like I'm going through all this, And, my dad asked me a couple times to share, like we would, in church service where you have, different things set up throughout the service. So, you go up, you say a little devotional or something before offering or what have you. So I'm going up and saying these devotionals, but no one knows about all this stuff. And I'm just living in this gross, to me, lie. And I heard a brother say, and hopefully I can quote him right, but I thought it was a great quote. He said, if the truth will set you free, then there's another truth to that side. Then lies build prisons. And I was living in a prison because of the lies. And I was in that prison, caged and just suffering and struggling. And as I began to go deeper into the lies, I just became more enslaved. And as I went through that process of being enslaved, trying to hide it by still being a good Christian young man at that point who graduated college, look at me, I'm doing well. And sometimes I'll ask, like, I'll go, hey, Dad, did you know what was going on with me? And, and I think sometimes parents know, but they have to let their children figure it out at the same time, especially when you become when you get into manhood for men. And so as I went through that whole process, struggling, I remember as I began to recover and started to walk again, regain strength in my femur, I just remember deep sorrow setting in. So the trauma and the anguish and the resentment and all of that turned into just deep sorrow, because as I began to come out of it, I believe that God started to just reveal to me this hypocrisy that I was living in, this two-facedness. Yeah. And as he began to show that to me, I just began to become really sorrowful and broken and upset with myself. And I'll never forget. It was in the summer of 2000 and I graduated from college 2004, 2006, right around there. And I'm just dealing with the deep anguish of everything. So you figure what I went through was like a 2-year process of everything with the femur and osteomyelitis. And as I'm dealing with that, and as he's taking me through that process, I remember just being broken down at one point, hot summer, I think July, or maybe, July, August, into July. And I just remember one night where I couldn't sleep. And as I couldn't sleep, I was just faced with the reality, like, Kermit, you have sinned. And as I recall it even now, the feelings that I had of being visited with my sin, what I did was so heavy on me that I just began to pray that night. And I just fell on my face. And I just remember literally, Miles, crying out to God for the whole night. I couldn't sleep. And I just remember deep sobbing, deep sorrow, deep crying. And my dad, he was a bivocational pastor. And as he's getting ready to leave for work early in the morning, like he always did, it was like, I think 2:30, 3:30 a.m., right between that time. He's leaving for work and I'm in the bathroom just sobbing on the floor. He's like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And I just literally did not sleep the whole night and just cried and asked, and I was pleading with God to forgive me. Like as Christians, we know what Jesus did on the cross. We know that he resurrected from the dead. But when we really begin to apply these truths to our life, it just hit me. And I was confronted with the fact that I literally sinned against God. I've literally been living a lie. I've literally tried to mask my trauma by indulging in more sex and more partying and just treating females foully. And as I was visited with that, and as I was going through that trauma, and as I was trying to hide it, he just dealt with me in that place of, Kermit, I sent Jesus to die for you. And as that reality became true, I was just confronted with the fact that I'm a sinner in need of God. And as he hit me with that, I didn't even wake up, but I went into the next morning and I confessed to my mom. I said, Mom, I got to talk to you. I told her everything. I said I had an abortion.
Wow.
I've been struggling with pornography. She just cried. She just cried with me. And she said, how come you didn't come to us? And I said, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Then my dad came home from work, and I never forget, it was Saturday morning. He was coming in because it was Friday night where all this happened. So Saturday, I tell my dad, and I never forget what he said to me. He said, now you're going to have to face the consequences as a man. And like, as a kid growing up, whenever I heard that from him, like, face the consequences, I'm thinking a butt whooping.
Yeah.
Like, I'm about to get a whooping.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that my dad was going to do something to me, my earthly dad, but it was that my heavenly Father was going to take me through this process of healing, of restoration, but also of just naturally having the consequences of my actions and what I did. So as I went through that whole process, at the young lady I was dating at the time, I told her everything and what happened as well. And she was shocked. She was, I'll probably say even turned off to a point, and what happened. And then what's weird, Miles, and I'll say this, is that I began, like, I told her, I said, oh, I want to marry you. I don't know where that came from. And it was like, I said that out of this, okay, I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. I've been doing all this with you. Now I need to marry you. And it was still the residual of dealing with the trauma, right, of everything that happened. And as I went through that, I'll never forget, she came over, I forget when, and as the Lord was dealing with me, and just really taking me through this process, man, she was with me. I take her home to her apartment in Riverside. And as I'm coming home, like my mind just begins to go different places, is the best way I can describe it. And after I drop her off, I end up at some campus. I think it was a church, but it had a school. And I'm just walking around on the campus, wandering around. At that time, I'm driving a Chevy Blazer Extreme. I left it parked on some hill, keys in ignition, doors open, and I'm on this campus. And I'm just wandering. And my parents are calling me. They're like, Kermit, where are you? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm looking for you. Where are you? And they said, what are you talking about? Where are you this late? Why aren't you home? And I said, I'm here. I'm waiting for you guys. And so whatever happened to my mind mentally, the doctors have a term for it, which I'll explain later. I just was looking for them, and they found me. They took me to Kaiser Hospital, and they did some blood tests. They were like, well, he hasn't been drinking. He's not on drugs. They wanted to see what was in my bloodstream. And they didn't know what was going on. And my dad, I remember him saying, well, maybe the osteomyelitis went to his brain, right? Which I don't think it can.
Oh, okay.
But he's like, maybe it went to his brain. So they took me back to USC, and they then recommended that I go to the psychiatric hospital at USC. So I went there, and here's the crazy part, Miles. I don't remember meeting the doctor there at the psychiatric ward at USC. Even to this day, I just don't remember. And we went in there. And I do remember going into the office and seeing the USC calendar with the football players, and me thinking I was a football player. And I was like getting in a 3-point stance in his office. And I remember that. And I remember thinking I was like a lineman or defensive lineman. And from there, I don't remember meeting him after. All I remember is waking up in the psychiatric ward in that hospital and restrained in the bed.
Wow.
And I remember my mom and her just like crying to me and just wanting to know that I was okay. And I remember getting mad because I was like, your breath stinks. And she was like, your breath stinks. And it was that little funny moment there. Yeah. And I don't think her breath did stink. I think I just didn't know what was going on. And so I was like, can I leave? They were like, no, you have to stay here. And I remember staying there. And the things that I did there, I remember loosely. And I forget how long I was there, but I'm in that psychiatric ward, and it's a traditional psychiatric ward. And so I'm in there, and I remember the person that was staying in the room with me, he left the room. They changed his room because I think he was afraid of me because of what I was doing. I was trying to kill myself. I was running into the window and trying to like jump out of it. I was ripping the curtains down. I was urinating everywhere. And I remember crawling around on the floor in a psychiatric ward, going into this older woman's room and taking her sweater and putting it on. I remember walking around, I think even walking around naked, and without any clothes. And just going through all of that, I remember picking up, they had like a payphone in there, picking up the payphone and speaking in Spanish or trying to speak in different languages and thinking someone was on the phone. And I just remember the doctors coming in there trying to talk to me, but I wasn't engaging with them. And I just went through that. I went through this, and I just remember not all being there. And the one thing that I remember as clear as day is that I'm in there, and and I guess I was a nuisance for them because they put me in a padded room, and that is a legitimate room. They put me in that padded room, and they had me, I believe, restrained. And as I'm there, my dad comes in to visit me, and I just remember, like I said, trauma is deep because I remember being restrained, trying to like push out like a baby, because that's where my mind was at. And all the trauma that I amassed and having the abortion and knowing what I did was wrong, at least to my mind was wrong because of the way that I did it. And saying like this is bad and feeling so distraught over it that I was trying to push out a baby while being restrained in that padded room. And my dad comes in and he's sitting on the floor and he just looks at me, goes, "I want my son back. I want my son back." And he's like in tears. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. That is etched in my mind because a father's love can change some things. And from there, I remember my dad leaving and me going back into my room, doing whatever I was doing. And I remember not eating. I didn't eat. I wasn't eating. I was just pushing away food. I wasn't eating. And I remember going back into the state I was in that hospital. And I remember some days later, I kind of like wake up and almost felt like I was in a trance. And I was like, where am I? Why am I here? And mind you, they were giving me medication in there. And I don't know what they were giving me. I forget the names of what they were giving me, but they were trying to treat me and what was wrong with me. And I said, why am I here? And my parents come back and they're like, you've been here for a while now, and and I was like, but I want to leave.
How long were you there?
I want to say maybe a couple weeks. And I'd have to talk to my parents about the time frame, maybe a week, maybe I think into 2 weeks. And what's crazy is that they had a family vacation planned to Cancun. And so they were ready to cancel that Cancun trip because of what I was going through. And I remember me being in there, I was like, I want to leave. I want to go home. And they're like, the doctor's like, no, you can't because of you're here for a reason. And I said, okay. I said, but I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. And they eventually let me leave. And they let me leave. They put me on medication. And then what they described to me, they said, well, you had a form of schizophrenia. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, whenever people experience deep trauma in their life, they go into another personality or another person. And they gave me these thick magazines to like read on it. And I was like, you just graduated from college. You might want to read these to learn about your condition. They said people from the ages of like 18 to 30 something experience. This is what they go through. And this is how it masks. This is how it shows itself. And I said, really? They said, you've been through a lot. And they said, this is, and your mind was trying to work through it. And this is the way it was working through. And I said, really? He said, so we're going to put you on medication. So they put me on some medication. And I remember what the medication, how it made me feel, because I was at home and I was taking it and I didn't like it. And I was getting mad because of what it was doing to my mind and my body and the way it was just making me feel. Eventually, after a couple weeks, before we were able to still go to Cancun for this family vacation, they took me off of it. Or actually, they had me on it into the trip into Cancun. And because they didn't even want me to travel on a plane, but the doctors cleared me so I can go with my fam and I went and they eventually took me off the medication. And I remember asking my dad, I said, Dad, what do you remember about me being in there? He told me everything, kind of what I was sharing with you just now. And he said, I prayed and I fasted for you. He said, I prayed 3 days And he said that third day, I just felt something. And and excuse the terms, but I don't think there's any a good way to describe or a best way to describe. But he said, I felt something in my spirit just break for you. He said something in me just broke, and I knew that you were set free. So literally, when I came out of that trance, that's when the Spirit of God moved. And when he said that to me, I was like, but you had to work. And because he had a physical job at that time. And he was like, I know, but I did it for you because you're my son. And when he told me that, and I kid you not, there's even a video when me and Tamara got married where he's officiating the wedding along with the pastor now that I'm with, Pastor Randy. My dad is officiating the wedding and he's in tears. Me and him are crying because we're exchanging this moment of he was like, only God knows where you've been, Kermit. Only God knows what he's brought you from. He said, you never forget it in your marriage. In that moment, it proved to me what everything that I went through, even everything that even as a man now, like God can do anything.
Yeah.
He can, when he says we can tell the mountain to move, it can. And so when my dad prayed and he fasted the way that he did with my mom, that mountain, which was what was going on in my mind, the schizophrenia, the trauma, that mountain, God took it and moved it. Because when we think of these mental health issues, I know that we think that there's no freedom. Man, Miles, I'm telling you that God can do something miraculous.
Yeah.
But and like my dad always says, do you take him at his word, Kermit?
Yeah.
And I don't know, you want to say something? Because I know.
Well, man, I'm just
because we still going. We're still
going. But up until right now, people aren't seeing that. I'm getting emotional, and the reason why is because, like, bro, I've known you for years, and I gotta say that. I'm sure Tamara would say he's crazy at home, whatever,
he still needs medication sometimes, but yeah.
But
that's the love of a wife. That's the love of a wife.
Shout out! Oh man, I'm getting all fogged up in my glasses here. But I know from my interaction with you, bro, like you're one of the most sober-minded people that of sound mind that I've ever engaged with, and so to see the difference, and I'm sure your parents even more so, right. Can see that. But here's why it's really impacted me what you're saying is, bro. So in my job, I won't get into my job too much because I can't really connect the two on this platform. But I'm a video person, and sometimes my job sends me to do certain videos for certain county departments, and one of them is behavioral health. And there was this one night we did I had to interview a bunch of parents that are dealing with their children who are suffering from schizophrenia. And this is probably one of the most scary nights that I ever had on my job. And the reason why I was interviewing people, my heart was breaking for them, but I stood up all night because I wanted to know what was going on here. Because somebody has said something, what you just said, that there's this period from 18 to 30, and I think for women, it's like 17 to like 27 or something. It's like a very specific age gap, and it's just something triggers it, where all of a sudden, this person that you've known has just been flipped off like a switch, and there's somebody else there. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, just out of nowhere. And I stood up all night wanting to know, like, is this something that could happen to my kids? And that terrified me. And to hear what you're telling me right now, because you grew up in a Christian home.
Come on.
Great family environment. Everything was done right to a certain extent.
Right. And
even still, there was traumatic experiences brought upon by your own doing.
Yep.
So what that tells me is that there's nothing that I could do
as a parent.
There's nothing I could do as a parent, and so that I knew that night.
Right.
And
there's one thing. And that's
Well,
what my dad did. Come on
Yeah,
now.
exactly. That's what I want to get at. That's why it moves me, because what you're telling me right now is that there is hope.
Oh, come on.
Because I'm telling you, it kept me up that night that this could happen to my sons. And there's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
And it terrified me. And what you're telling me right now is that there is hope. And the reason why I was scared is because I have family members that are in prison right now because of their schizophrenia, because of the traumatic experiences that they've gone through. They've made, they didn't have a psychiatric ward that they can go through. A lot of my family is in poverty, and so they didn't have resources, and resources to be able to even understand what they're going through. But as I did my research, I discovered I got family members that suffer from this, and right now they're in prison because of it. And so that's what scared me. And right now it's giving me so much hope right now, bro. What you're sharing. And one other thing is that the immense weight of sin that hiding sin does to you. When you were talking about everything that you were doing, this duplicitous life that you were living as a believer, as a Christian, man, it's a huge weight. And the one thing I kept thinking about is how Jesus did not suffer hypocrites. That word hypocrite that he uses in the original language, Hippocrates, it literally means to wear a mask.
Yep.
Like how you were saying, suited and booted and stuff, it literally means to wear a mask.
And now they got us wearing masks. Now we got to wear masks because of COVID.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, those coughs earlier were not COVID coughs. I just had a little thing in my throat from the coffee. I just want you all to know that. But the flesh is something that the enemy will use in spiritual warfare to, you said it earlier, gratifying yourself.
Right.
That becomes your God.
Right.
And there's a very scientific way of looking at porn addiction.
Right.
Because I know that that's a major part of this, but I also
it affects
know
the brain deeply.
It affects the brain deeply. It's the endorphins.
Yeah, endorphins. Right.
Endorphins, yeah, and they scar your brain.
Well, the best way to think of it, since you live up here in the mountains, is like this. When we think of a trail, and trails are formed because of ruts that are made in the trail.
Yeah.
And over time, as the ruts get deeper, the trail will stay.
Yeah.
That's what pornography does. It literally makes a ruts and a trail in your mind so that you need those endorphins to find satisfaction.
Yeah.
Because the trail has been formed.
Yeah.
And that's what the brain does. So it's very deep.
Yeah. And I know that also the fact that your involvement with that abortion, bro, that's a heavy weight there.
Right.
That's super traumatic to the point where there's this ministry now in California, actually here in the Inland Empire, and they hired me to do some video work for their new ministry that was inspired by a pro-life ministry out in Israel, because they do a lot of work in Israel, and actually it's in Upland.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
And they started this thing called the Garden of Life.
Oh, wow.
Where people who have had an abortion and now, whether they're a Christian or not, but they're dealing with that trauma. And what they do is they plant a tree.
Oh, wow, that's tight.
And they put a rock at the bottom of the tree, and because the tree growing symbolizes life, right? And so they put the name of that. They named the child if they hadn't before, and it's a great healing process, bro. So I'm gonna connect you with them, man.
Yeah, I would love
I'm gonna
that.
have them on this show also. Raw and Christine, I think they started this ministry, bro, and a church got behind it, and they bought this huge property, and they started working on it. I've been doing video there. It's gonna look beautiful, bro, and it's gonna be such a great healing process for many people.
And it is so true, because for me, I had no place to work that out except for in that psychiatric ward. And I think, and obviously that was a stage and a process that even I'm still in that process. It's not something that's just taken care of overnight.
Yeah.
And so because even after all of that, I was still having sex with women. I was still dealing with the sin. I was still fighting sin, and sin is not something that is overcome, but its power should diminish and diminish and diminish until we see Christ.
Yeah.
And so, and even as I talk to you now, man, it's not like, oh, I'm struggling with this or that. No, it's like I've learned to confess and put away those things. And it's something that has to be done regularly, right? And I say that to say that after all of that, after coming out of that place, I still was going through stuff, you know, and it's by God's grace that, and I was reading this book called The Dark Side of Leadership, and they talked about how a lot of leaders that get found out or something happens, it's because they never dealt with the trauma, the dark side of their trauma, and took it all the way down to its bottom place. Yeah. And I think that's what we must do, just as humans, right? Dealing with what we've been through and taking it all the way down to its core and saying, I'm going to overcome this.
Yeah. And what would you say is the starting point for that?
Man, I think honestly, vulnerability. I think starting with being vulnerable with someone, the right person. And for me, that started, what is this, 2020, 16 years ago, 14 years ago with my parents.
Confessing to them.
Yeah, confessing and being vulnerable to the place where I just couldn't hide it anymore. Yeah. But that was at a place where God was breaking me down, though. And I think it's hard to practice this type of confession or type of just openness with people, because there is, if we're honest with ourselves, we just don't want to be looked at and are judged in a weird way, where it's like we really do value ourselves. Yeah. And I think there's a happy dichotomy there where value yourself, but be okay with being able to put yourself in a place of humility too. Yeah. And I think that's where I started, is being vulnerable, understanding that those around me really do love me and they want the best for me.
Not to mention that I think there's wisdom in the scriptures concerning that, which is he that conceals his sin will not prosper.
Right.
Jesus said, what's done in the dark will be brought to light. And so it's that self-preservation mode where you're trying to, say, hey, I got it together. And, you don't want to be seen as vulnerable.
Right.
But it's going to be brought out anyways.
You know what? And that's what happened with me. And I think the one who conceals his sin will not prosper is such a true passage in Proverbs, right? Because when the writer writes that, think if it is Solomon writing that, indeed, he didn't hide anything about his life, regardless of how you view his life. He just didn't hide anything. And I think about like the financial turmoil and stress that I went through with this, like after like hiding the abortion. Sometimes I feel like, man, God, am I still paying the effects of what I did? Is that still when I think about the like taking that $300 and some and using it to kill a life. And just hiding that and the ramifications of hiding that. Sometimes we want, when I think of my daughter and I think of when she gets a consequence, she wants it to be over quickly. Yeah. But it just doesn't work like that. And it's the same thing with us. There are seeds that I put into motion, into effect when I did what I did. Yeah. And it was And just one of those being, like I said, financially, some of the ramifications that I dealt with throughout my life, right? But it was as I did confess the sin, and as I even later, because I still struggled with pornography after that, and that was a fight, because like you just said, the ruts in my mind that were created from what I watched drastically affected me in a way where that sin, you don't fight, you don't stop fighting that until you die, just because of what you've done to your mind. And it's not that, I'm giving in. No, it's that you don't want to think in a gross way, in the way you scarred your mind, especially at a young age, and you already start to develop that way of thinking and so forth. And so you have to stay in a place of vulnerability with people that can uphold you and will not judge you and will love you. And then you have to be able to get the right resources for yourself, knowing that God is the source, but you need resources, right? Like you said about your family, you said they didn't have the resources, so they they went through some things. And I think vulnerability plus resources and then connecting in the right ways, that can bring about healing. But then it's being committed to the process, because the one thing I always say is that, the process is great, but trust the processor through the process. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that has really helped me, is always looking to Christ, always looking to Jesus throughout this whole process, because, man, it's been a fight. And to think of, like, even the damage that what I did, the damage that pornography took even into my marriage, it's like you have to fight that. And I think one of the major healings for me was artistically was poetry, because when I came out of that, and they had me seeing like a shrink, and I remember I was visit her home. She had like office at her home. She had a separate back house in Rancho Cucamonga, and I would visit her, and that's when I started writing poetry, and that was a healing process for me to be able to write and express myself. And I can remember some of those beginning pieces I wrote about the struggle and everything that I went through. And she was like, "You need to keep doing this because it's helping you." And that's what I've done. I never have written to perform. And anytime I catch myself doing that, I just stop writing. But I really truly try to write for just the healing process and processing my thoughts and thinking, because that's a way where I can get out everything that I'm just thinking about life, about whatever. And
so do you have a poem you can share with us right now?
I do. And it's funny because I wrote a poem, and I think I performed it at Living Way when you were doing the open mic, and it was called Flatline. And I redid it though. Okay. I did what I call Flatline 2.0. And it's funny because when I wrote it, I'm really writing about my condition, but I'm writing to the church, to the American church in general. And perhaps what we're experiencing with this COVID-19 and the way that it has affected the body to being able to meet online. Maybe what I said is prophetic or just whack. I don't know. But I mean, I could share that with you. I got to put my glasses on because I can't see.
Okay.
So check it out. America's churches have flatlined. Designed to be spiritual hospitals, but now their presence exists for their own demise. Church seats lined in rows like each church is a tombstone, housing bones where hearts have become stones. No wonder church attendance is low. Because who wants to visit a cemetery more than once a week unless love has to do with it? But you can't feel love in cold bodies unless veins have blood rushing to movements and arms that circulate hospitality. The American church was no sudden fatality. And its opponents are not the one who murdered its existence by firing shots, calling them weaklings for using religion as a crutch, claiming they didn't know how to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, so they just needed something to attach to carry their weight. No, America's church's initial wound from its fatality started with injury from being spiritually overweight, carrying years of baggage that they checked at the church's front door in fear that no one could steward their weight on scales of grace. So when they weigh in on Sundays, they just carry the demeanor of a strange case. Actors and actresses sparring with inner dispositions resembling Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, pouring out smiles on faces in mile-long church hallways as their smiles say hi, but hide the heckling conversation their mind was walking through. Schizophrenic tendencies nursed with a little juice as though it could disguise the pain of their union with inner thoughts that manifest itself in behaviors that eventually ruin them. No spiritual healing ever came in the form of cranberry juice and unsalted crackers. Instead, it added more weight to American Christians who can't unpack their case for Christ. So the American church looks nice in its case of death. A casket dressed up to make believe like they have life, like it's a weekend at Bernie's. Preachers playing roles on stages where words appear to dress up dead souls. But when a man takes a knee at injustices that hit on police brutality, the church's words become ignored and the Bible is trumped. And cold hearts marginalize a protest with partiality that a flag is to be reverenced, even though America's first reverence line seats to be segregated. Divisive mindsets seem to permeate the American church. Denomination versus denomination. Churches segregated like LA neighborhoods over which set you represent. So no wonder why I see America's churches dead on every corner and block. Is it because they have been unable to block the fact that Satan seems to be sitting in the best spot, the American Christian's heart? So if you don't go to church, I'll actually understand. I'll understand if you don't want an American church to proselytize you, baptizing you in the name of some being as though he is an object made for you to have prosperity because you confessed your sins and now you have posterity. But witness churchgoers in continuous postures of charity, hands in back pockets and dipped in fancy purses, giving churches 1/10 of their earnings like Rihanna's their pastor. Better have my money. And if you pay the church dues, you might just have your best life now. Now, if the payment for entry is and staying is too high at your local nonprofit organization, we all know that you can hide. Just disguise yourself by speaking their language, making you visible as a common patron. Going something like this. Lifting up, how's your heart? Are you saved? Hedge of protection, working on my testimony. Backsliding, servant heart. I found Jesus. I covet your prayers. Washed in the blood. God's calling me. That rocked me. Traveling mercies. Is that secular? Love on them. Putting Satan on notice. I feel led. Unspoken prayer requests. Doing life together. Going through a season. Die to self. Someone please translate this Christianese, because I didn't know that people who flatline could speak. But the existence of death is tragically in the smell. And the American church reeks of a factory that has assimilated an assembly line of American-made Christians that have become obsolete like Detroit motor car companies, importing routines that make church models foreign. So activity is bustling, but the origin of its design is foreign to the maker who supplies the spiritual electric time sequence measurement that shows life in its activity. But I just said it's foreign to the designer because he's the heart that's missing, because America's churches have flatlined.
Wow, man, that you hit the nail on the head for some things that I've been actually saying to people during this time. At such a time as this, where for the first time in over 100 years,
Right.
churches were empty on Easter.
Right.
And it's like the Lord is taking away these things.
Right.
Because
It certainly feels that way.
for years, ever since the first time I ever went on a overseas mission trip, where I went to what they would say a third world country, and I come back, they talk about re-entry, right?
Yeah.
Hey, don't start, saying all kinds of stuff upon re-entry, and
But you
ever
can't,
since then, it's like the American church. There's something wrong with it. There's something wrong with it, and all you got to do is go and see how they're doing church in other parts of the world.
Preach.
And so it really, and here's the thing. I don't want to be too cynical when it comes to the American church also, because I've wrestled with this. We have what we have, and we have to work with it, and we need people saying the things that you just said.
Right.
We also have to understand that, yes, sure, we send missionaries all over the world right now, but America also sends pornography all over the world right now. I wish that poem would have gone viral, man, because I really believe that the Lord is taking away things right now, to get people's attention, to bring them back to the heart of what true worship is.
And it was funny because writing the first poem, I was just, the flatline piece was more of like, I'm trying to revive my heart back to Christ. And I want to go back to my first love from when I said that prayer at age 7. Yeah. And then, writing it now, it was just being completely frustrated. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. Like if Christ is here, he'd be calling a lot of people out, a lot of churches out. So that's where it comes from, Miles, man. Just wanting to see balance, and wanting to see Christ properly exalted. I mean, it's funny that the churches can be empty, but you still have, and I'm not knocking any pastor because we're live streaming as well, but you can still have pastors in an empty church to a camera right there. And is it about that even? And so it's like,
or is it about keeping it going?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so I really struggle with that because it's like, it was never about the one person in the front saying anything to the people. It was always about Christ.
Yeah.
And
people and the world knowing that he is Christ by our love for each other.
Right.
This is great, bro.
I'm humbled to be here, so thank you, man.
Man.
Appreciate you.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're encouraged. I pray that what you heard today gives you hope and that you can look to the Lord and put all of your trust and faith in him. God bless you guys.